Hello there. Welcome to Science Verse Before Sleep. Tonight, we're going to journey together through the deep corridors of time. We'll walk among creatures so strange, so wonderful, that if we hadn't found their bones buried in ancient stone, we might never have believed they existed at all. These are the animals that evolution sculpted into forms almost beyond imagination. Giants that shook the earth, predators with teeth like daggers, flyers with wingspans wider than small airplanes. So, settle in now. Find that comfortable position. Let your breathing slow and deepen. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. Just listen and let your mind drift back through millions of years to times when our world looked nothing like it does today. Let's begin our journey in the ancient oceans. Chapter 1. The realm of ancient seas. The Earth's oceans have always been mysterious places, vast, deep, full of secrets. But if you could somehow travel back through time and slip beneath the waves of prehistoric seas, you would find yourself in a world almost alien in its strangeness. The water is different here, warmer in some eras, colder in others. The continents themselves sit in unfamiliar positions. The sun glimmers down through the surface just as it does today, creating those beautiful columns of blue-green light that fade into darkness below. But what moves through that light, what glides through those ancient currents, would take your breath away. Megalodon, the impossible shark. Let us begin with perhaps the most fearsome predator ever to swim through Earth's waters. A creature so large, so powerful, that even its name sends a shiver of primal recognition through us. Megalodon, the big tooth. Imagine, if you will, floating in the warm waters of the Miocene epoch, some 15 million years ago. The sun is high overhead. The water is clear and blue, and seems to stretch forever in every direction. Schools of fish dart past, their scales catching the light. Sea turtles paddle lazily through the gentle current. Everything seems peaceful. Then, from the depths below, a shadow begins to rise. At first, you might mistake it for a submarine or a small whale, but as it comes closer, closer, breaking up through those shafts of sunlight, you realize, with growing wonder and terror, what you're seeing. It's a shark, but not like any shark swimming in our modern oceans. This shark is nearly 60 feet long as a bowling lane, as long as several school buses parked end to end. Its body is thick and powerful, built like a torpedo designed by nature over millions of years of evolution. Its skin is rough, covered in those tiny tooth-like scales called denticles that help it glide silently through the water. But it's the mouth that captures your attention, that enormous mouth. When Megalodon opens its jaws, they stretch wide enough to swallow a small car. Inside are rows upon rows of teeth. Not dozens, hundreds, each tooth the size of a human hand, serrated, sharp as broken glass, designed to slice through flesh and crush through bone with unimaginable force. Scientists have found these teeth scattered across the world. For centuries, people discovered them and thought they must be dragon's teeth or the tongues of serpents turned to stone by magic. They had no other explanation for such massive, fearsome objects. Even now, when we know what they are, when we can calculate that Megalodon's bite force was somewhere around 40,000 pounds per square inch, they're still difficult to fully comprehend. To put that in perspective, a lion's bite force is about 600 pounds. A great white shark, the largest predatory shark alive today, has a bite force of around 4,000 pounds. Megalodon could bite down with 10 times that power. It could crush a car. It could bite through metal. When it clamped its jaws around a whale, which it often did, the bones would simply shatter. But Megalodon wasn't just about raw power. This was an intelligent predator. It had a brain comparable to modern great whites, with enhanced regions for processing smell and electromagnetic signals. It could detect a single drop of blood in millions of gallons of water. It could sense the tiny electrical impulses generated by the heartbeat of prey from miles away. Picture it hunting in the ancient seas. It moves through the water with surprising grace for something so large. Its tail sweeps back and forth in long, powerful strokes. It's tracking a pod of early whales, ancestors of the creatures we know today. But these are smaller, more primitive. Still, they're massive animals, 10, 20, 30 feet long. To Megalodon, they're food. The shark rises from below, accelerating through the depths. The whale doesn't see it until it's far too late. There's a massive impact. Those huge jaws close around the whale's body. The teeth sink in. Bone crunches, and it's over in moments. The other whales scatter in panic, but Megalodon feeds slowly, methodically, taking its time with this enormous meal. For millions of years, Megalodon ruled the oceans. It had no natural predators. Nothing could challenge it. It swam through warm tropical seas, through temperate waters, following the migrations of whales and other large prey. Fossil evidence shows that young megalodons grew up in coastal nursery areas, protected shallows where they could hunt smaller prey and grow strong before venturing into the deep ocean. Female megalodons were even larger than males, possibly reaching lengths of 70 feet or more. They would have given birth to live young, as many sharks do. The baby megalodons, if we can call them babies, were already 10 feet long at birth, already formidable predators in their own right. But then, something changed. Around 3.5 million years ago, Megalodon began to disappear from the fossil record. The world was cooling, ice ages were beginning, ocean currents were shifting. The whales that Megalodon depended on were evolving, becoming faster, smarter, better at escaping. They were also migrating into colder polar waters, where Megalodon couldn't easily follow. Perhaps the giant shark's enormous size became a disadvantage. It needed so much food to sustain itself. As prey became scarcer and harder to catch, perhaps Megalodon simply couldn't adapt quickly enough. Perhaps climate change made the waters too cold. Perhaps new predators, like the ancestors of modern orcas, began competing too effectively. We don't know the exact reason, but slowly, over hundreds of thousands of years, this magnificent, terrifying creature faded from the oceans. The last Megalodon died sometime around 2.5 million years ago, leaving behind only those incredible teeth and occasional vertebrae as evidence that such an impossible animal ever existed. Now the oceans belong to different creatures. The great white shark, impressive as it is, reaches only about 20 feet in length. The whale shark, even larger at 40 feet, is a gentle filter feeder. No predatory shark alive today comes close to matching Megalodon's size and power. That throne sits empty now, and has for millions of years. But sometimes, when researchers send submarines down into the deepest parts of the ocean, down into those abyssal regions we've barely explored, down where the water is eternally dark and the pressure would crush a human instantly, they wonder, could something that large still exist in those depths? The answer, almost certainly, is no. But the oceans are vast and deep and full of secrets, and the ghost of Megalodon swims through our imagination still. Dunkleosteus, the armored nightmare. Let us drift even further back now, much further, back beyond the age of dinosaurs, beyond the first forests, beyond even the first amphibians crawling onto land. We're traveling back to the Devonian period, some 350 million years ago. This was a time called the Age of Fishes, and the oceans teemed with life stranger than any fever dream. The water here is different, shallower in places, with vast reef systems built not by corals but by ancient creatures called stromatoporoids. The continents are arranged in configurations you wouldn't recognize. There are no birds in the sky because birds haven't evolved yet. No mammals on the land because mammals are still hundreds of millions of years away. This is a world that belongs entirely to the sea. And in these ancient seas, there lived a predator that looked like something from a nightmare sketched by an artist who'd never seen a real animal. Its name is Dunkleosteus, and it was one of the most successful predators to ever exist. Dunkleosteus was an armored fish, not a shark, but a placoderm, part of an ancient group of jawed fishes that would eventually go extinct, leaving no descendants. It grew to about 30 feet in length, not as large as Megalodon, but still massive, still terrifying. But size wasn't what made Dunkleosteus so remarkable. What made it extraordinary was its armor. Its entire head and the front portion of its body were encased in thick, interlocking bony plates, not scales. Plates, like a medieval knight's armor, but grown naturally from its own body. These plates were up to 2 inches thick in places. They were nearly impenetrable. Nothing in the Devonian seas could bite through that armor. Nothing could wound Dunkleosteus from the front or sides. It was essentially a living tank, swimming through the ancient ocean with complete confidence. Its body tapered behind the armored section into a more flexible, muscular tail that propelled it through the water with surprising speed. But the most unsettling feature, the thing that makes Dunkleosteus seem almost unreal, was its mouth. You see, Dunkleosteus didn't have teeth. Not proper teeth, anyway. Instead, the bones of its jaw had evolved into sharp, self-sharpening blades. Its upper and lower jaws formed a beak-like structure with blade edges that worked like guillotines. When Dunkleosteus closed its mouth, these bony blades would slide past each other with tremendous force. Scientists have calculated that Dunkleosteus had one of the most powerful bites of any fish ever. It could exert over 8,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. It could bite through bone, through the armor of other armored fish, through anything it encountered. And it could open its mouth incredibly fast. In just 1/50th of a second, Dunkleosteus could unhinge its jaws and create a powerful suction that would pull prey into its mouth before the prey even realized what was happening. Then those blade-like jaws would slam shut, and it would all be over. Imagine being a smaller fish in the Devonian Ocean. You're swimming along, perhaps feeding on the ancient reef, perhaps just moving through the blue-green water. You don't see Dunkleosteus approaching from behind. Its armor is dark, blending with the deeper water. It moves with deceptive speed for something so large and heavily plated. Then suddenly, impossibly fast, there's a rush of water. You're being pulled backward. You try to swim away, but the current is too strong. And then you're inside that terrible mouth. The jaws close. The blades slice through darkness. Fossils of Dunkleosteus have been found with partially digested fish remains preserved nearby. These fish were bitten in half with such force that they were likely regurgitated because Dunkleosteus couldn't properly digest them. It was a messy eater, this armored nightmare. It would bite prey into pieces, swallow what it could, and leave the rest floating in the water. For millions of years, Dunkleosteus was the apex predator of its world. It had no enemies. It feared nothing. Young Dunkleosteus, still small and vulnerable, would have stayed in shallower waters until their armor fully developed. But once they reached adult size, the entire ocean was their hunting ground. They likely hunted sharks. Yes, sharks existed back then, primitive ancestors of the sharks we know today. They hunted other armored fish. They hunted anything that moved and looked like food. With their powerful jaws and impenetrable armor, they were practically invincible. But then came the end of the Devonian period. There was a mass extinction event, one of several that have punctuated Earth's history. The reasons are still debated by scientists. Perhaps volcanic activity, perhaps asteroid impacts, perhaps climate change and ocean anoxia, where the oxygen in the water dropped to levels that couldn't sustain large predators. Whatever the cause, the armored fish died out. All of them. Not just Dunkleosteus, but every placoderm species vanished from the fossil record. They left no descendants. The sharks survived. Some other fish groups survived, but the armored fish, these incredible evolutionary experiments in body armor and jaw power, were gone forever. Now, when paleontologists dig through rocks from the Devonian period, they sometimes find those thick skull plates, perfectly preserved. They find the jawbones, still sharp after 350 million years. They piece together what this animal must have looked like, how it must have lived, and they create reconstructions that look so alien, so strange, that it's hard to believe such a creature ever swam in Earth's oceans. But it did. For millions of years, Dunkleosteus was real. It was alive. It hunted and fed and reproduced and ruled its ancient seas with absolute authority. And now it's gone, vanished into deep time, leaving behind only fragments of bone and endless questions about what it must have been like to live in a world where such creatures existed. Chapter 2: When Giants Walked. Let us rise now from the ancient seas and step onto land. Let us move forward through time, through millions of years, until we reach periods that are more recent, at least in geological terms. We're entering the age of mammals. The dinosaurs have been gone for millions of years now. The Earth is cooler than it once was. Ice is forming at the poles, and across vast grasslands and forests, creatures of enormous size are walking. This is the Pleistocene epoch, beginning around 2.5 million years ago. It's a time of ice ages when massive glaciers advance and retreat across the continents. A time when the climate swings between frozen tundra and more temperate conditions. A time when megafauna, these enormous mammals, dominate the landscape. And among all these giants, one creature stands out for how deeply it has captured human imagination. We've found them frozen in ice. We've painted them on cave walls. We've dreamed of bringing them back to life. They are symbols of a lost world, ambassadors from a time when everything seemed larger, stranger, more magnificent. Woolly mammoth, giants of the ice. Picture, if you will, a vast plain of snow and ice. The wind blows constantly here, cold and sharp. In the distance, mountains rise up, their peaks hidden in gray clouds. This is Siberia during the last ice age, around 20,000 years ago. The landscape stretches flat and white to the horizon. It seems empty, lifeless. But then, through the blowing snow, shapes begin to emerge, large shapes, moving slowly but steadily across the frozen ground. As they come closer, you can make out details. These are huge, shaggy beasts, covered in thick fur that hangs down almost to the ground. Their breath forms clouds of vapor in the frigid air. Their tusks, enormous and curved, sweep up and back like scythes. These are woolly mammoths, and they are perfectly, magnificently adapted to this frozen world. An adult mammoth stood about 11 feet tall at the shoulder, about the size of a modern African elephant, though some individuals grew even larger. They weighed around 6 tons, but it wasn't their size that made them remarkable. It was everything else about them. Every detail of their bodies was shaped by the Ice Age. Their fur was extraordinary. They had 2 layers of it. The outer layer consisted of guard hairs, coarse and long, some reaching 3 feet in length. These protected against wind and snow. Underneath was a layer of dense, soft wool that trapped body heat close to the skin. This underfur was so thick and effective that mammoths could survive temperatures far below 0 without difficulty. Their skin was thick and insulated with a layer of fat that could be 3 inches thick in places. Their ears were tiny, much smaller than those of modern elephants, to prevent heat loss and frostbite. Their tails were short for the same reason. Everything about them was designed to conserve warmth. Those magnificent tusks curved in ways that still puzzle scientists. Some think the mammoths used them to sweep snow aside to reach vegetation beneath. Others believe the tusks were used in mating displays, with males showing off their size and symmetry to potential mates. Still others suggest they were weapons, used in battles with rivals or predators. Perhaps they served all these purposes and more. The tusks never stopped growing. The older a mammoth got, the longer and more curved its tusks became. Some specimens have been found with tusks over 15 feet long, weighing more than 200 pounds each. They twisted and spiraled as they grew, creating beautiful, intricate curves. Each mammoth's tusks were unique, like fingerprints made of ivory. Mammoths lived in herds, just as elephants do today. Family groups led by matriarchs, wise, old females who knew where to find food in different seasons, who remembered the locations of water sources and safe places to rest. The young stayed close to their mothers and aunts, learning the ways of survival in the harsh Ice Age world. They communicated with each other through low rumbles, some too deep for human ears to hear. They touched each other with their trunks in gestures of affection and reassurance. They mourned their dead, standing vigil over fallen family members, touching the bones gently with their trunks. In all these ways, they were remarkably like modern elephants. The same emotional depth, the same social bonds, the same intelligence. In spring and summer, when the ice retreated somewhat and the tundra came alive with grasses and flowers, the mammoths would feed constantly. They needed enormous amounts of food to sustain their massive bodies. An adult could eat 400 pounds of vegetation in a single day. They would use their tusks to strip bark from trees. They would use their trunks, which had two finger-like projections at the tip, to grasp individual plants with remarkable delicacy. In winter, food became scarce. The mammoths would use their tusks to dig through deep snow, sometimes several feet deep, to reach the dried grasses beneath. They would break ice to reach water. They would move slowly to conserve energy, their breath freezing instantly in the Arctic air, their massive forms dark against the endless white of the landscape. We know all this in remarkable detail because mammoths didn't just leave us bones, they left us bodies, complete bodies, frozen in permafrost, preserved so perfectly that we can study their fur, their skin, their internal organs. When the first frozen mammoths were discovered in Siberia, people couldn't believe what they were seeing. Here were Ice Age animals, tens of thousands of years old, that looked like they might wake up at any moment. Some of these frozen mammoths still had food in their mouths, buttercups, grasses, the last meal they ever ate, preserved across the millennia. Some had injuries visible on their bodies, wounds from predators, broken bones that had healed, evidence of long lives lived in a harsh world. The most famous of these frozen mammoths is probably a baby named Lyuba, found in Siberia in 2007. She died when she was only 1 month old, probably by drowning in mud. But the mud preserved her perfectly. She still had her trunk, her eyes, her internal organs. Even the milk from her mother's last feeding was still in her stomach. Through Lyuba and others like her, we can reach across 40,000 years and touch the Ice Age. Ancient humans knew mammoths well. They hunted them, though this was dangerous and difficult work. They painted them on cave walls with remarkable skill, capturing the curve of the tusks, the shaggy outline of the fur. They carved mammoth ivory into art and tools. They built huts from mammoth bones in regions where trees were scarce. The mammoths were part of their world, as real and present as any modern animal. But then, gradually, the mammoths began to disappear. The last Ice Age ended around 11,000 years ago. The climate warmed, the glaciers retreated, the vast tundra grasslands that mammoths depended on shrank, replaced by forests and wetlands. The mammoths tried to adapt, but their food sources were vanishing. At the same time, human populations were growing. Hunting pressure increased. We don't know exactly how much human hunting contributed to the mammoth's extinction. Some scientists think it was the primary cause. Others believe climate change was more important. Most likely, it was a combination of both. a perfect storm of environmental change and human predation that the mammoths couldn't survive. The last mainland mammoths died around 10,000 years ago, but on a few remote islands in the Arctic, small populations held on. On Wrangel Island, north of Siberia, mammoths survived until just 4,000 years ago. This means that when the ancient Egyptians were building pyramids, when the first cities were rising in Mesopotamia, when human civilization was flourishing around the world, there were still mammoths alive on that distant frozen island. These final mammoths were smaller than their ancestors. Island dwarfing had reduced them to about 6 feet tall. They were probably inbred, their genetic diversity dangerously low, but still they persisted, these last remnants of a vanished age, until finally, for reasons we may never fully understand, the last mammoth died. Now scientists talk about bringing them back. We have mammoth DNA, recovered from those frozen bodies in the permafrost. We have the technology to edit genes, to potentially recreate a mammoth or something very close to it. The question is no longer if we can, but whether we should. What would it mean to bring back a creature whose world no longer exists? Where would a mammoth live in our modern age? What purpose would it serve? These are questions without easy answers, but they speak to how deeply mammoths have impressed themselves on human consciousness. They've been gone for thousands of years, yet we can't stop thinking about them. They haunt us, these shaggy giants of the Ice Age. They remind us of a world that was wilder, stranger, more magnificent than our own. A world we lost, perhaps forever. Chapter 3. The Predators. Let us move now to warmer lands, to places where the ice never reached, or reached only lightly, to forests and grasslands where other giants walked, and where predators with terrible teeth hunted in the shadows. The Pleistocene was not just a time of cold, it was a time of extremes, of ice and warmth, of deserts and jungles, all existing in different parts of the world at the same time. And in many of these places, creatures evolved that seemed designed to inspire nightmares. Predators so powerful, so specialized, that they dominated their ecosystems completely. When we find their fossils, when we piece together their skeletons in museums, people stop and stare, because these are animals that seem too extreme to be real.
Saber-Toothed Tiger, the cat with impossible teeth. Imagine yourself in California, 20,000 years ago. Not the California of today, with its cities and highways and carefully managed lands, but a California of vast oak forests and open grasslands. A California where tar seeps naturally up from the ground in dark, sticky pools. A California where megafauna roam in abundance. You're standing at the edge of a meadow in the late afternoon. The sun is low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. A herd of ancient bison graze peacefully in the distance. Birds call from the trees. Everything seems calm. Then, from the forest shadow, a shape emerges, low to the ground, moving with the fluid grace that only a cat possesses. As it steps into the light, you see it clearly, and your breath catches. This is Smilodon, the saber-toothed tiger, though it's not really a tiger at all, but its own unique branch of the cat family, a branch that would eventually die out completely. leaving no descendants, no modern relatives except in the most distant evolutionary sense. An adult Smilodon was about the size of a modern lion, but built very differently. It was stockier, more heavily muscled, especially in the shoulders and forelimbs. It weighed around 600 pounds. Its legs were relatively short, but incredibly powerful. This wasn't a cat built for speed. This was a cat built for strength. But of course, it's the teeth that capture your attention. Those impossible teeth, the canines, the fangs, extend down from the upper jaw like curved daggers. They're 7 inches long, 7 inches of serrated, razor-sharp tooth projecting down from its mouth. When the Smilodon closes its jaws, these fangs extend well below its chin. How could such teeth even function? How could a predator hunt with weapons so extreme, so specialized? For years, scientists debated this. Some thought the teeth must be for display, like a peacock's tail. Others thought they were weapons used in fights between rival males. But careful study of fossils and biomechanical modeling revealed the truth. Those teeth were killing instruments, perhaps the most refined killing instruments ever evolved, but they didn't work the way you might expect. A Smilodon couldn't just bite down hard like a modern lion or tiger. Those long fangs would break under that kind of pressure. They were too delicate for crushing bites. Instead, Smilodon used a different technique. It would ambush its prey, rushing from cover and using its powerful forelimbs to wrestle the prey animal to the ground. Its front legs were stronger than those of any modern big cat. It could hold prey down with immense force. Then, once the prey was pinned, Smilodon would open its jaws extraordinarily wide, much wider than a modern cat can manage. Its jaw could gape open to nearly 90 degrees, an angle that looks impossible but allowed those long canines to clear the way. And then, with precision and tremendous power from its neck muscles, it would drive those fangs down into the throat or neck of its prey. The teeth would slice through hide and muscle and blood vessels with terrible efficiency. The serrations on the back edges of the fangs helped them cut through tissue even as the Smilodon pulled back. Death would come quickly from blood loss and suffocation. The Smilodon's bite was weak compared to a modern big cat, but it didn't need a powerful bite. The teeth did all the work. We know Smilodon hunted large prey, perhaps ancient bison, perhaps young mammoths or mastodons, perhaps giant ground sloths, creatures we'll talk about soon. The prey varied depending on location and what was available, but Smilodon specialized in large animals, animals that required those powerful forelimbs to wrestle down, animals whose thick hides required those long fangs to penetrate. Fossil evidence suggests that Smilodon may have lived in groups like modern lions. Many Smilodon fossils show signs of injuries that healed, suggesting that other members of the group brought food to injured individuals who couldn't hunt. This kind of social behavior, this caring for wounded group members, tells us something important about these animals. They weren't just killing machines. They had social bonds. They helped each other. We found thousands of Smilodon fossils at a place called the La Brea Tar Pits in Los Angeles. These natural tar seeps trapped animals for tens of thousands of years. An animal would wander into what looked like a pool of water, only to find itself stuck in thick, viscous tar. It would struggle and call out, and predators, hearing the distress calls, would come to investigate easy prey. They would venture into the tar themselves and become trapped. The tar preserved their bones perfectly. Now we can study them in incredible detail. We can see bite marks on the bones of prey animals. We can see injuries and diseases. We can piece together entire ecosystems from the bones entombed in that ancient tar. And more Smilodon fossils have been found at La Brea than any other large predator. They came again and again, lured by struggling prey, unable to resist even when the trap was obvious. But those magnificent teeth, those specialized weapons, may have ultimately contributed to Smilodon's extinction. When the climate changed at the end of the Pleistocene, when the megafauna began to disappear, Smilodon suddenly found itself without suitable prey. It couldn't easily switch to hunting smaller animals. Its whole body, especially those teeth, was designed for taking down giants. Around 10,000 years ago, Smilodon vanished from the fossil record. All three species gone within a relatively short period. The changing climate probably played a role. Human hunting, reducing the populations of large prey animals, probably played a role. Perhaps even competition from other predators, including early dogs and human hunters, contributed. Whatever the specific causes, the result was the same. The saber-toothed cats died out. All of them. This wasn't just one species going extinct. It was an entire evolutionary strategy disappearing. Several different groups of mammals had independently evolved saber teeth at various times in Earth's history, but Smilodon was the last, the final and most refined expression of this particular approach to predation. Now, when we see a Smilodon skeleton in a museum, mounted and still and silent, those teeth seem almost grotesque in their extremity. They seem like they couldn't possibly work, like they must have been a disadvantage, an evolutionary dead end. But we know better. For millions of years, those teeth were perfect. They were exactly what Smilodon needed to be the dominant predator in its world. It's only now, looking back from a world without saber-toothed cats, that they seem impossible. In their own time, in their own place, they were as natural and inevitable as anything else evolution has produced, and they were magnificent. Chapter 4, Giants of the Past. Let us journey now to the southern hemisphere, to lands that were isolated from the rest of the world for millions of years, to continents where evolution took strange and wonderful turns, creating creatures found nowhere else on Earth, places where the normal rules seemed not to apply, where animals evolved into forms so peculiar that even scientists had trouble believing the fossil evidence at first. Thylacine, the striped ghost. We're in Tasmania now, an island south of Australia. The year is 1930, not so long ago really, not millions of years past, not thousands. Within living memory, the sun is setting over the eucalyptus forests. The air is cool and clean, scented with the distinctive smell of the trees. In a zoo in Hobart, Tasmania's capital city, an animal paces in its enclosure. It looks, at first glance, rather like a dog. It's about the size of a large fox, lean and long-bodied, with short fur colored a sandy brown. But then you notice the stripes across its back and hindquarters. Dark stripes, like a tiger's, and the tail is stiff and thick, more like a kangaroo's than a dog's. When it opens its mouth to yawn, you see something unsettling. Its jaw opens wider than seems possible, wider than any dog or cat could manage. The gape is enormous, almost snake-like, and inside are 46 teeth, more than any other mammal you can think of. This is Benjamin, the last known Thylacine, the last Tasmanian tiger, the last of his kind. He died on September 7th, 1936, locked out of his sleeping quarters on a cold night. He died of neglect, of exposure, of a forgotten error, and with him died an entire species, an entire branch of evolution that had persisted for millions of years. The Thylacine was not a tiger, despite the name. It wasn't even closely related to dogs, despite the resemblance. It was a marsupial, like kangaroos and koalas, a carnivorous marsupial, one of the largest to exist in modern times, and it represented an extraordinary example of something called convergent evolution. You see, the Thylacine evolved in isolation in Australia and Tasmania, cut off from the rest of the world for millions of years. There were no true dogs or cats on these islands, no placental predators at all. So the marsupials evolved to fill those ecological niches, and the Thylacine evolved to be remarkably, almost eerily similar to a large dog or wolf, even though it was no more closely related to those animals than you are to a kangaroo. This is what makes the Thylacine so fascinating to scientists. Here was an animal that looked like a dog, moved like a dog, hunted like a dog, but its entire internal biology was completely different. Female thylacines had pouches where they raised their young. They had different skeletal structures, different reproductive systems, different everything. And yet, superficially, you might mistake one for a lean, striped dog. The Thylacine stood about 2 feet tall at the shoulder. It was built for endurance rather than speed. It would hunt by following prey for long distances, wearing the prey animal down through persistent pursuit. Its stiff tail probably helped it balance when making sharp turns. Those distinctive stripes, 13 to 19 of them, were thought to provide camouflage in the dappled light of the forest. When European settlers arrived in Tasmania in the early 1800s, Thylacines were still relatively common. They hunted wallabies and other native prey in the wilderness. But the settlers brought sheep, and the Thylacines, finding this new prey easy to catch, began taking livestock. The farmers responded with bounties. The government encouraged the killing of Thylacines, paying money for each dead animal. The hunting was relentless. Thousands of Thylacines were killed. They were shot, trapped, poisoned. The species was already under pressure from competition with introduced dogs and from disease. The hunting pushed them over the edge. By the early 1900s, Thylacines were becoming rare. By the 1922nd, they were almost gone from the wild. A few were captured and placed in zoos, but they didn't breed well in captivity. They were shy, nervous animals, stressed by confinement. Benjamin was the last one, and he died alone, and unnoticed. It took decades for people to fully realize what they'd done. An entire species, extinct, gone, forever. And it had happened so recently, so quickly. Now there's grainy black and white footage of thylacines pacing in zoo enclosures. Brief glimpses of these strange, beautiful animals. They move with an odd, stiff-legged gait. They yawn, showing that impossible jaw gape. They look into the camera with dark, intelligent eyes. The footage is silent, so we don't know what sounds they made. Some reports say they could make a coughing bark. Others describe a yipping call. People still search for thylacines in the remote forests of Tasmania. Every few years, someone reports a sighting, a glimpse of something striped moving through the undergrowth. Strange calls heard at night, tracks that don't quite match any known animal. But despite intensive searches, no conclusive evidence has ever been found. The thylacine is gone. Or is it? Scientists have recovered thylacine DNA from museum specimens. There's talk of de-extinction, of using genetic technology to bring the species back. It's theoretically possible, but even if scientists could recreate a thylacine, would it really be the same? Without parents to teach it how to hunt, how to behave, would it be a true thylacine, or just a genetic approximation? These are questions we may someday have to answer, but for now, the thylacine remains extinct, a ghost of Tasmania's forests, a reminder that extinction isn't always something that happened in the distant past. Sometimes it happens in living memory. Sometimes we're the ones responsible. And sometimes, once an animal is gone, it's gone forever, no matter how much we wish we could bring it back. Chapter 5. The Age of Reptiles. Let us leave the age of mammals now and travel much further back before the ice ages, back before the first grasses evolved, back to a time when the climate was warmer and more stable than anything we've experienced in recent epochs. We're entering the age of reptiles, when dinosaurs walked the earth and strange cousins of dinosaurs ruled the skies and seas. This is the Mesozoic era, spanning from about 252 million years ago to 66 million years ago, a vast stretch of time divided into three periods: the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous. The world looks very different here. The continents are joined together in places, separated in others. The climate is generally warm. There are no ice caps at the poles. Forests of cycads and conifers cover the land, and everywhere, reptiles have diversified into forms we can barely imagine. Quetzalcoatlus, the impossible flyer. We're standing on a coastal plain in what will someday be Texas. The time is the late Cretaceous period. About 68 million years ago, the ocean is nearby, visible as a strip of blue-green water on the horizon. The air is warm and humid. Flying insects buzz through the vegetation. In the distance, you can see a herd of ceratopsians, horned dinosaurs, moving slowly through the landscape. The sky is clear and bright. Birds fly overhead. Though they're not quite like modern birds, they still have teeth. Some of them still have clawed wings. They're relatively new on the evolutionary scene, still experimenting with what it means to fly. But then, something else appears in the sky. At first, it's just a distant shape. But as it comes closer, you realize this is something extraordinary, something that shouldn't be possible. It's enormous. The wingspan is wider than a small airplane, wider than any bird that has ever lived. As it glides overhead, blocking out the sun for a moment, you can make out details: long, narrow wings, a body that seems almost impossibly small for those wings, and a head, an extraordinarily long head that ends in a pointed, toothless beak. This is Quetzalcoatlus, named after the Aztec feathered serpent god, the largest flying animal to ever exist on Earth. And when scientists first described it from fossils, many refused to believe it could have actually flown. Something that large, they said, simply couldn't get off the ground. The physics wouldn't allow it. But they were wrong. Quetzalcoatlus could fly, and it did so magnificently. The wingspan of Quetzalcoatlus was somewhere between 36 and 40 feet. That's wider than most fighter jets. The largest individuals may have had wingspans approaching 50 feet. Standing on the ground, a Quetzalcoatlus was as tall as a giraffe, around 16 feet from ground to the top of its head. It weighed between 400 and 500 pounds, though some estimates go higher. But despite this size, it was built incredibly lightly. Its bones were hollow, like those of birds, but even more refined. The bone walls were incredibly thin, reinforced with internal struts, like the wings of an airplane. Its skull, despite being over 6 feet long, weighed only a few pounds. The entire animal was an exercise in weight reduction, every gram shaved away to make flight possible. Those wings weren't made of feathers. Quetzalcoatlus wasn't a bird. It was a pterosaur, a completely different group of flying reptiles. The wings were made of a tough, leathery membrane stretched between an enormously elongated fourth finger and the body. The membrane was probably reinforced with fibers that controlled its shape and stiffness, allowing for precise control during flight. The question that puzzled scientists for years was how Quetzalcoatlus could take off. Modern large birds like albatrosses need a running start to get airborne, but Quetzalcoatlus's wings were attached to its arms in a way that made running difficult. How could it launch itself into the air? Recent research suggests the answer. Quetzalcoatlus used its powerful forelimbs, those arms to which the wings were attached, to vault itself into the air. It would crouch down, then explosively push off with all 4 limbs, essentially doing a standing jump that would launch it 8 to 10 feet straight up. That was enough. Once in the air, those massive wings would catch it, and it would begin to fly. In flight, Quetzalcoatlus was probably a spectacular glider. It would soar on thermal currents, those columns of warm rising air, barely flapping its wings. It could travel hundreds of miles this way, covering vast distances in search of food with minimal energy expenditure. Like a modern condor, but 3 times larger. What did it eat? This is still debated. Some scientists think it was a scavenger, like a vulture, soaring over the landscape looking for dead dinosaurs. Others think it waded in shallow water, using its long beak to catch fish and small animals. Still others suggest it walked on land, stalking small dinosaurs and mammals, stabbing them with its beak like a giant terrestrial stork. The truth might be all of the above. Quetzalcoatlus was probably an opportunistic feeder, eating whatever it could find. That's often the way with very large animals. They can't afford to be too specialized. They need to take advantage of any food source available. We know that Quetzalcoatlus lived inland, away from the coasts. This was unusual for pterosaurs. Most preferred coastal environments where fish were plentiful, but Quetzalcoatlus adapted to a different lifestyle, making its home on inland plains and forests, occupying a niche that no other flying animal could fill. For millions of years, Quetzalcoatlus and its relatives ruled the skies. They had no competition from birds, which were still relatively small. They had no competition from bats, which wouldn't evolve for tens of millions of years. The sky belonged to the pterosaurs, and Quetzalcoatlus was their ultimate achievement, the largest flyer evolution would ever produce. But then came the end of the Cretaceous period. An asteroid 6 miles wide struck what is now the Gulf of Mexico. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs. Wildfires swept across continents. A cloud of dust and debris filled the atmosphere, blocking out the sun for years. The climate plunged into something like nuclear winter. The dinosaurs died. The pterosaurs died. About 75% of all species on Earth went extinct. It was one of the worst mass extinction events in the planet's history. When the dust finally settled, when life began to recover, the world was very different. The age of reptiles was over. The age of mammals was beginning. And nowhere in the fossil record after that catastrophic day do we find evidence of pterosaurs. They were gone, all of them. Every species. Quetzalcoatlus, with its impossible wingspan and its alien beauty, vanished forever. Now we have only fragmentary fossils, pieces of wing bone, skulls crushed and distorted by millions of years of pressure. From these fragments, we try to reconstruct what these animals looked like, how they moved, how they lived. Every reconstruction is to some degree a guess. We can't know for certain what color they were, whether they had elaborate crests or displays, what sounds they made. We can only study the bones and make our best inferences. But even with all the uncertainty, one thing is clear. Quetzalcoatlus was one of the most remarkable animals to ever evolve. A creature that pushed the boundaries of what's possible. A giant that flew. Chapter 6. Serpents and Giants. Let us stay in the age of reptiles, but move to a different time and place, the world after the dinosaurs, the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, between 66 and 34 million years ago. The asteroid has struck, the dust has settled, life is recovering, diversifying, filling the niches left empty by the extinction. The climate is warm, warmer than today. Tropical forests extend far into what are now temperate regions, and in these forests, in the swamps and rivers of South America, something is growing, something that will become one of the largest predators the continent has ever seen. Titanoboa, the serpent that couldn't exist. Imagine a river in what is now Colombia. The time is about 60 million years ago. The water is warm, murky, flowing slowly through dense rainforest. The air is heavy with humidity. Giant ferns grow along the banks. Trees rise up, their canopy blocking most of the sunlight. Everything is green and growing and alive. You're standing on the muddy bank, perhaps unwisely, watching the water. Fish jump occasionally. A crocodilian, an ancestor of modern caimans, basks on a log in the distance. Birds call from the trees. The forest seems peaceful. Then the water begins to move. Not from current, but from something in the water. Something large. The surface ripples and bulges. And then, impossibly, a head emerges. A snake's head, but it's the size of a football. No, larger. The size of a man's torso. The head continues to rise. Behind it comes a body, thick as a tree trunk. Thicker. The snake keeps coming, coil after coil, emerging from the water. It's not possible. Nothing could be this large. Snakes don't grow to this size. They can't. But this one does. This is Titanoboa, and it's 42 feet long. When paleontologists first discovered Titanoboa fossils in a Colombian coal mine in 2009, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The vertebrae were enormous, more than twice the size of the largest anaconda vertebrae. When they did the calculations, when they modeled how large a snake with these vertebrae would be, the results seemed impossible. 42 feet long, over 2,000 pounds. A snake so large it could swallow a crocodile whole. A snake that dwarfed any serpent alive today. The largest snake living now, the reticulated python, can reach lengths of 25 feet in exceptional cases. Titanoboa was nearly twice that length and far, far heavier. How could such an animal exist? The answer lies in the climate. Snakes are cold-blooded. They rely on external heat to warm their bodies and power their metabolisms. In the hot, tropical world of the Paleocene, with average temperatures around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, a snake could grow much larger than in cooler climates. The heat provided the energy needed to sustain such an enormous body. Titanoboa probably spent much of its time in the water. Its great size would have been cumbersome on land, but in the rivers and swamps, it could move with grace and power, like a modern anaconda, but so much larger. It could swim silently, with barely a ripple. It could hold its breath for extended periods, lurking underwater, waiting. What did Titanoboa eat? Everything it could catch. Large fish, certainly. Turtles, crocodilians, any mammal unlucky enough to come to the water's edge to drink. Titanoboa was a constrictor. Like modern boas and pythons, it would seize prey in its jaws, then quickly coil its massive body around the victim. The coils would tighten, not crushing the prey, as is commonly believed, but squeezing just enough to prevent breathing. Each time the prey exhaled, the coils would tighten a little more. Within minutes, the prey would lose consciousness from lack of oxygen. A few minutes more, and it would be dead. Then would come the difficult part for any constrictor, swallowing the prey whole. Snakes have incredibly flexible jaws. Their lower jaw isn't fused at the chin like ours. The two halves can spread wide apart, combined with elastic ligaments and skin. This allows a snake to swallow prey much larger than its head. Titanoboa could probably swallow prey 3 feet in diameter. A full-grown crocodile would have been difficult, but manageable. The process would take hours. Slowly, using waves of muscle contraction, Titanoboa would work the prey down its throat and into its stomach. The snake's metabolism would kick into high gear, producing powerful digestive acids. Over the course of weeks, the prey would be completely broken down, bones and all. Titanoboa might not need to eat again for months. Between meals, Titanoboa would bask, lying in shallow water or on muddy banks, absorbing the tropical sun, maintaining its body temperature, perhaps sleeping in whatever way a snake sleeps. These were solitary animals. They would only come together to mate, and then briefly. The details of their reproduction are unknown, but likely similar to modern large constrictors. The females probably retained eggs inside their bodies until the young were ready to hatch, giving birth to live young. Those young would have been large themselves, probably 6 feet long at birth. They would have been independent from the moment they entered the world, hunting smaller prey, avoiding adults of their own species who wouldn't hesitate to eat them, growing slowly, steadily, over decades, until they too reached that impossible size. For millions of years, Titanoboa was the apex predator of South America's tropical waterways. Nothing challenged it, nothing could. But then, gradually, the climate began to cool. The Paleocene gave way to the Eocene. Temperatures dropped. The tropical forests that covered much of the continent began to shrink. And Titanoboa, dependent on that heat, began to disappear from the fossil record. Perhaps it couldn't maintain its body temperature efficiently in the cooler climate. Perhaps prey became scarcer. Perhaps other predators, warm-blooded mammals growing larger and more diverse, began to outcompete it. Whatever the reasons, Titanoboa went extinct sometime in the late Paleocene or early Eocene. Now, when we dig in those Colombian coal mines, we find its fossils. Vertebrae the size of dinner plates, ribs like archways. From these fragments, scientists have reconstructed this impossible animal. They've created models and simulations. They've calculated its weight, its length, its bite force. They've determined what it ate and how it lived. And still, even knowing all this, even seeing the fossils with our own eyes, Titanoboa seems too extreme to be real. A 42-foot snake, a serpent that weighed more than a ton. It pushes against the edges of what we think is possible. But the fossils don't lie. It existed. It was real. For a brief window in Earth's history, the climate was just right, and Titanoboa emerged, and then that window closed, and it was gone. No snake will ever grow that large again. The world is too cool now. The tropics aren't hot enough. The conditions that allowed Titanoboa to exist will never return, at least not in the foreseeable future. We're left with fossils and reconstructions and the haunting knowledge that once, not so long ago, in geological terms, serpents of impossible size slid through rivers that no longer exist, in forests that have long since turned to coal. Chapter 7: Lost Lands and Final Giants. We're nearing the end of our journey now. We've traveled through hundreds of millions of years. We've seen the rise and fall of countless species. But there are still a few more stories to tell, a few more creatures so strange that they deserve their moment in this long, slow catalog of Earth's vanished wonders. Some of these creatures went extinct so recently that humans watched them disappear. We have photographs, written accounts, museum specimens. These aren't distant mysteries. They're fresh wounds in the fabric of Earth's biodiversity, and they remind us that extinction isn't just something that happened in the prehistoric past. It's happening now. It's always happening. The dodo, too trusting to survive. Let us travel to a small island in the Indian Ocean, Mauritius, a volcanic island that rose from the seafloor millions of years ago, an island isolated from any continent, with its own unique ecosystem that evolved in splendid isolation for eons. The year is 1600. European sailors have just begun visiting this island. Before humans arrived, Mauritius was a paradise. Dense forests covered the volcanic slopes. Rivers ran clear and cold from the mountains to the sea. And walking through these forests, completely unafraid, was a bird unlike any other. The dodo. Even the name sounds slightly absurd, slightly comical. But there was nothing comical about the bird itself. Nothing absurd except perhaps its trust. The dodo stood about 3 feet tall and weighed around 40 pounds. It was related to pigeons, believe it or not, though it looked nothing like them. It had lost the ability to fly millions of years ago when its ancestors first reached Mauritius. On an island with no predators, flight was unnecessary. Evolution stripped it away. Instead, the dodo became a ground-dwelling bird. It was plump, covered in gray-blue feathers. Its wings were tiny, vestigial, useless for anything except perhaps balance. Its tail was a small tuft of curled feathers. Its legs were short and strong, yellow-scaled like a chicken's, and its beak, oh that beak, was large and curved, with a hooked tip perfectly designed for eating fruits and seeds. The dodo lived peacefully in the forests. It nested on the ground, laying a single white egg in a simple scrape among the fallen leaves. Both parents would take turns incubating the egg and feeding the chick when it hatched. They ate fruits that fell from the trees, particularly from the Anomalocaris tree. Some scientists believe that this tree depended on dodos to spread its seeds. The seeds needed to pass through a dodo's digestive system before they could germinate. The dodos had no fear. Why would they? Nothing on Mauritius hunted them. No mammals, no large reptiles, no predatory birds. They had evolved in perfect safety. So when the first human sailors arrived, the dodos walked right up to them, curious, trusting. The sailors were hungry. They'd been at sea for months. Fresh meat was desperately needed. The dodos didn't run. They didn't fight. They were easy to catch, easy to kill. The sailors reported that the meat was tough and not particularly good, but it was food. They took as many as they needed, but it wasn't just the direct hunting that doomed the dodo. The sailors brought other animals with them. Rats escaped from the ships. Pigs, goats, and monkeys were released on the island to provide future food sources. These invasive species discovered the dodo's ground nests. They ate the eggs, they ate the chicks. The dodos, having never faced such threats, had no defense. The forests were cut down for timber and to to clear land for settlements. The dodo's habitat shrank, their food sources disappeared, the population declined rapidly. By the 1662, just 60 years after humans first arrived, reports of dodo sightings became rare. By 1690, there were probably none left. By 1700, the dodo was extinct. It happened so fast. Less than a century from first contact to complete extinction, an entire species erased, and the tragedy is how preventable it was. The dodos weren't being systematically hunted to extinction, not like the thylacine or the passenger pigeon. They were just casualties of human carelessness, collateral damage in the colonization of a small island. We have very few remains of dodos, a handful of bones in museums, one dried head and foot, some scattered fossils. No complete skeleton from a single individual was preserved. This is partly because sailors and settlers didn't think to preserve them. The dodo was just a bird, just food. Who knew it would disappear so quickly? Who knew future generations would care? We have some drawings made by sailors and naturalists who saw living dodos. But these drawings are often crude, inconsistent with each other, possibly exaggerated. Some show the dodo as impossibly fat and ungainly. Others show it more proportionally. We don't know which are accurate. We're not even completely sure what color the dodo was, though most sources describe it as grayish-blue with some white. There are no photographs. Photography wasn't invented until long after the dodo was gone. No recordings of its call, no detailed descriptions of its behavior from trained scientists. Everything we know comes from fragmentary accounts by sailors and traders who had no idea they were documenting a species in its final years. The dodo has become a symbol. It appears in Alice in Wonderland, cementing its place in popular culture. We use the phrase "dead as a dodo" to mean completely, irrevocably extinct. The dodo represents the tragedy of extinction, the finality of it. Once a species is gone, it's gone forever. No amount of wishful thinking can bring it back. Or can it? Scientists have recovered some DNA from dodo remains. There's been talk of de-extinction, of using genetic engineering to recreate a dodo or something close to it. But even if this were possible, even if we could somehow bring back an animal that looks like a dodo, where would it live? Mauritius is completely changed. The forests are gone. Invasive species are everywhere. The dodo's ecological niche no longer exists. Perhaps this is the real lesson of the dodo. Extinction isn't just the loss of a species. It's the loss of all the relationships that species had with its environment, the loss of its role in the ecosystem, the loss of its place in the web of life. You can't just remove one thread without affecting the whole tapestry. And sometimes, when you pull on a thread, the whole thing begins to unravel. The dodo is gone. The Tambalacoke tree, the one that may have depended on dodos to spread its seeds, is now critically endangered. The forests of Mauritius are shadows of what they once were. An entire ecosystem was disrupted by the loss of one trusting bird, and we did it. We, humans, in less than a century, without even meaning to. It's a sobering thought, and it should make us think very carefully about the species that still exist the ones teetering on the edge of extinction right now. Because once they're gone, once they become as dead as the dodo, no amount of regret will bring them back. The time to act is always now, always before it's too late. The dodo didn't get that chance, but other species still do. Chapter 8: Armored Leviathans and Ancient Mysteries. Before we end our journey, let us visit one more corner of deep time. One more creature so bizarre that when scientists first tried to understand it, they couldn't agree on what they were looking at. Fossils that seemed impossible, teeth arranged in ways that defied explanation. We're moving through different eras now, sampling strange creatures from various points in Earth's history. These are the oddities, the animals that don't fit neatly into categories, the ones that make us realize how truly creative evolution can be when given enough time and opportunity. Helicoprion, the whorl-toothed enigma. Imagine the Permian seas about 290 million years ago. This is before the dinosaurs, before the first mammals, even before the mass extinction that would end the Permian period and nearly wipe out all life on Earth. The oceans are full of strange creatures, many of which would look alien to our eyes. Swimming through these ancient waters is something that looks, at first glance, like a large shark. It's about 12 feet long. Its body is streamlined, built for pursuit. But as it turns toward you, you see something that makes no sense, something impossible. Its lower jaw contains a spiral of teeth, not rows of teeth like a normal shark, a spiral, like a circular saw blade, but made of dozens and dozens of triangular teeth, all connected in a tight whorl. The spiral curves backward into the mouth, disappearing into the throat. New teeth at the front, older, larger teeth spiraling back and inward. This is Helicoprion. And for over a century after the first fossils were discovered, scientists argued about where these tooth spirals belonged. Some thought they were on the dorsal fin, like a defensive spine. Others thought they protruded from the tip of the snout. Still others believed they were on the tail, used like a whip. It wasn't until modern CT scanning technology allowed researchers to examine complete fossil specimens that the truth emerged. The tooth whorl was in the lower jaw, positioned so that as Helicoprion closed its mouth, the spiral would roll backward, slicing into prey caught in the mouth and pulling it toward the throat. Those teeth never fell out, as normal shark teeth do. Instead, new teeth grew continuously at the front of the spiral, pushing older teeth back and around in that strange circular arrangement. The oldest, largest teeth at the back of the whorl may have extended into the fish's throat, possibly helping to grip and manipulate prey. What did Helicoprion eat? Probably soft-bodied prey like squid and small fish. The tooth whorl wasn't designed for crushing or cutting through bone. It was a slicing tool, perfect for gripping slippery prey and drawing it inexorably into the gullet. A living conveyor belt of teeth, unique in all of evolutionary history. Helicoprion lived for millions of years, successfully hunting the Permian seas. But, like so many others, it vanished in the Great Permian Extinction, the worst mass die-off in Earth's history. When life recovered, when new predators evolved to fill the empty oceans, none of them ever developed anything like Helicoprion's tooth whorl again. It was a one-time evolutionary experiment, strange, successful for a while, and then gone forever. Hallucigenia, the creature named for dreams. Let us go back even further now, much further, to the Cambrian period, over 500 million years ago. This is when complex life first exploded in diversity, when the first animals with hard shells and skeletons appeared in the fossil record. This is the dawn of the animal kingdom as we know it. In the ancient seas of the Cambrian, on the ocean floor, something tiny is walking. It's less than 2 inches long. Its body is tubular, worm-like, but rising from its back are long, straight spines, and underneath, where its legs should be, are more spines, or perhaps tentacles, or perhaps both. This is Hallucigenia, named because when scientists first saw its fossils, they thought it looked like something from a hallucination. They literally couldn't figure out which end was the head and which was the tail. They couldn't tell which side was up and which was down. The creature seemed to defy basic biology. Eventually, better fossils were found. The mystery was partially solved. Hallucigenia walked on 7 pairs of stubby legs. The long spines on its back were probably defensive, protecting it from predators above. Its head was small, bulbous, with a simple mouth ringed by tiny teeth. It crawled along the Cambrian seafloor, feeding on organic debris and microorganisms. But even now, Hallucigenia seems strange beyond comprehension. It was related to modern velvet worms, though you'd never guess it from looking at fossils. It represents a time when life was still experimenting with basic body plans, when evolution was trying out designs that would never be repeated, when the rules of what an animal could look like were still being written. Anomalocaris, the Cambrian super predator. In those same Cambrian seas, something much larger is hunting. This is the apex predator of its time, the terror of the ancient ocean floor. Its name means abnormal shrimp, though it's not a shrimp at all. It's not really like anything alive today. Anomalocaris grows up to 3 feet long, enormous by Cambrian standards. Its body is segmented, with fin-like lobes running down each side that undulate in waves, propelling it through the water with graceful, alien motion. At the front of its body are 2 large appendages, curved and covered in spines, perfect for grasping prey, and its mouth. Its mouth is unlike anything else that has ever evolved. It's circular, ringed with plates that overlap like the petals of a flower or the aperture of a camera. These plates can constrict and dilate, pulling prey into a central opening. Looking into that mouth is like looking into something mechanical, something designed rather than evolved. Anomalocaris hunted the abundant trilobites that crawled across the Cambrian seafloor. It would seize them with those grasping appendages, carry them to its mouth, and crush them with those circular jaw plates. Fossil trilobites have been found with distinctive bite marks that match Anomalocaris' mouth perfectly. For millions of years, Anomalocaris was the largest predator in the sea. But eventually, as life continued to evolve, as fish with jaws appeared, as predators grew larger and more sophisticated, Anomalocaris and its relatives faded away. The Cambrian ended. The strange experimental forms that characterized that era mostly vanished. The The survivors were the designs that worked best, the ones that would give rise to all the animals that came after. But for a brief window in deep time, the oceans belonged to creatures like Anomalocaris, creatures so strange, with body plans so alien, that when we find their fossils, we have to remind ourselves that these things were real. They lived, they hunted, they evolved over millions of years, and then they were gone, leaving behind only impressions in ancient stone. These deep-time creatures remind us of something important. The animals we've discussed tonight, the Megalodon and the Mammoth and the Smilodon. As strange as they seem, they're actually quite familiar. They're sharks and elephants and cats, just scaled up or slightly modified. But if we go back far enough, we find creatures that don't fit into any modern category. Creatures that show us just how different life can be from what we know. And perhaps, millions of years in the future, if there are minds to look back at our time, they'll find our animals equally strange. The giraffe, with its impossible neck, the platypus with its bizarre combination of features, the octopus with its distributed intelligence. Perhaps, from a sufficient distance in time, everything seems strange. Everything seems too wonderful to be real. But it is real. All of it. The past was real. These creatures existed. They had their moment in the sun, or in the sea, or in the ancient forests. They lived and died and passed away. And now we remember them. We study their remains. We try to understand what it was like when they walked the earth. And that's a beautiful thing, in its way, that we can reach back through time, that we can touch the deep past through fossils and imagination, that we can know, even if only partially, what came before us, what built the world we inherited, what made us possible. Epilogue. The endless story. We've traveled far tonight, through oceans deep and ancient, across ice age, tundra, and tropical forests, through millions upon millions of years. We've met creatures so strange, so wonderful, that they seem like they stepped from dreams rather than from the real history of our planet. The Megalodon, with jaws wide enough to swallow us whole. The woolly mammoth, shaggy giants of the frozen north. The saber-toothed tiger, with teeth like daggers. The Thylacine, the striped ghost that vanished within living memory. Titanoboa, the impossible serpent. Dunkleosteus, armored and unstoppable. Quetzalcoatlus, soaring on wings wider than houses. The Dodo, too trusting for its own good. Each of these creatures was perfectly adapted to its time and place. Each was successful, sometimes for millions of years. They weren't failures. They weren't evolutionary dead ends. They were magnificent expressions of life's endless creativity. They were real as you or I. They breathed and fed and reproduced and died, generation after generation, across spans of time we can barely comprehend. And yet, they're all gone now, every single one. The oceans where Megalodon hunted are empty of such giants. The tundra where mammoths walked is silent. The forests where Smilodon stalked its prey know such teeth no more. These creatures have passed into the realm of memory and fossil and reconstruction. but their disappearance is part of a larger pattern, a pattern that has played out since life first began. Species arise, they flourish, they adapt to their circumstances as best they can, and eventually, when circumstances change too much or too quickly, they fade away. This is the nature of life on Earth. Change, adaptation, extinction, renewal. 99% of all species that have ever lived are now extinct. Think about that for a moment. 99%. The creatures we've discussed tonight are just a tiny fraction of the vast multitude of species that have come and gone. For every animal we know about, there are thousands we'll never discover. Their fossils have been lost to time. They left no trace. They lived and died and vanished completely, as if they never were. And yet, life continues. New species evolve to fill the niches left empty by the old. The story never ends. It just changes. The characters are replaced, but the play goes on. Earth has been telling this story for over 3 billion years, and it will continue long after we're gone. But there's something different about our time, something unprecedented. For the first time in Earth's history, one species, our species, has the power to dramatically accelerate extinction. We've seen it with the Dodo and the Thylacine. We're seeing it now with countless species hovering on the edge of oblivion. The question we face is what we choose to do with this power. Will we be remembered as the species that witnessed the 6th mass extinction and did nothing? Or will we be the species that learned to live differently, to share the planet with other forms of life, to preserve rather than destroy? These are heavy thoughts, too heavy, perhaps, for the edge of sleep, so let them drift away now. Let go of the worry and the wonder. You've traveled far tonight, further than any journey in waking life could take you. You've walked with giants. You've swum with monsters. You've soared with impossible flyers. Let these images fade now into dreams. The Megalodon sinking back into dark waters, the Mammoth disappearing into swirling snow, the Smilodon melting into forest shadow, all of them returning to the deep past where they belong, all of them at rest at last. And you should rest too. Your breathing is slow and steady now. Your body is heavy and comfortable. Your mind is quiet, ready for sleep. Let yourself drift. Let yourself sink into soft darkness, as peaceful as those ancient seas before anything with teeth evolved to swim through them. Tomorrow, you'll wake and the world will be as it is. Modern, familiar, full of its own wonders and challenges. But tonight, you've touched something deeper. You've connected with the long, strange history of life on Earth. You've remembered that we're part of something vast and ancient and ongoing. Sleep now. Dream of ancient things, if you will, or dream of nothing at all. Let the darkness hold you gently. Let the silence soothe you. You're safe here. You're home. And all those extinct creatures, all those impossible animals, are finally at peace in the deep stone of time. Good night, sleep well, and thank you for journeying with me through the ages.